Hello, brothers and sisters of the NALC. How are you doing today? Today we'll be talking about how to file a successful start time grievance. Now, this is something that we all do not like when management moves the start times later because management seems to think that they can put business before the contract. This makes our job harder, the day getting dark earlier in the winter months. So, how could we successfully file a grievance to change our start times back? I usually don't begin with the remedy in these training videos, the remedy that we would request, but that's what we're going to do this time. What remedy are we going to request and are we going to be able to attain by following this training video? We will be able to attain and we will request the following remedy: that management cease and desist from violating Section 434 of the ELM, Section 122 of the M39, Section 8.4 of the JCAM, or the National Agreement, Article 8.4, that management will compensate all regular letter carriers, as well as those on ops or hold downs, with out of schedule premium or an additional 50% times the straight time rate from the date the schedule change went into effect until management changes the schedule start time back to whatever it was before. In the event timely notice was posted, in the event timely notice of the change was not posted, management will pay overtime instead, and any other appropriate remedy. Now, what is the linchpin of a successful start time grievance? Is it the justification of the start time itself? In other words, which should we be arguing that the start time change makes it more difficult for carriers to do their job because of having to work in the dark, for example, or that it is less efficient to start later? And let's face it, we usually don't grieve start time changes that are earlier because they are actually in the best interest of everybody, including the Postal Service, generally. Now, I would suggest focusing on M39 Section 122 because this is what National Arbitrator Carlton Snow stated is the determining factor for management establishing start times. That is when at least 80% of the mail is on or at letter carriers' cases. That is when the start time should be established. Generally, we want to stay away from mismanagement arguments about how it's more efficient or less efficient, or the customers get their mail later. Why? Because due to Article 3, management has the right to establish start times even if they're less efficient, even if they have failures because of the darkness hours. So, instead, let's focus on what the National Arbitration has stated, Section 122 of the M39, which states 122.1, establishing schedules. 122.11, consider the following factors in establishing schedules. Schedule carriers to report before 6 a.m. only when absolutely necessary. B. Fix schedules to coincide with receipt and dispatch of mail. At least 80% of the carrier's daily mail to be cased should be on or at their case when they report for work. C. Schedule carriers by groups. Form groups of carriers who make the same number of delivery trips and whose office time is approximately the same. Management has changed the start time for sections in an installation in the past, but the same rules apply. And guess what? all of the mail for the installation arrives on the same truck. So how is management going to justify changing the schedule for only one part of the office or installation and not the other? Well, we're going to delve into that a little bit. Additional arguments management makes regarding function 4, the availability or efficiency of their clerk personnel. However, M39 section 122 is the only requirement that mail be on or at the carrier's cases when they report for work. Now, I know management has made many other arguments, and arbitrators have been split down the middle in accepting their reasoning or not accepting it, but we want to focus on the headquarters view, the national arbitration, which trumps all of those regional arbitrations. So, with that lengthy introduction and explanation out of the way, what is going to be the linchpin for having a successful start time grievance? The only crux issue on whether your grievance will be successful or not will be whether the start time is ultimately deemed temporary or not. Why? Because management may very well have the mail there at the appropriate time. But guess what? What changed? What changed that all of a sudden the start time needs to change? And we've all seen how certain installations have changed their start time 2 or even 3 times in the last couple years. Therefore, read in conjunction with M39122, Article 8.4 of the JCAM is very important. See, this article allows us to reach deep into management's pocketbook, which always brings about contractual compliance. And the remedy is already there. Article 8.4 reads, if notice of a temporary change is given to a full-time employee by Wednesday of the preceding service week, even if this change is revised later, management has the right to limit the employee's work hours to the hours of the revised schedule, and out of schedule premium is paid for those hours worked outside of and instead of his or her regular schedule. Now, there's 2 remedies in 8.4. It also talks about if management doesn't give timely notice, then the overtime rules apply. However, you get none of this if your start time is deemed permanent instead of temporary. So with these 2 factors in mind, M39122, and whether the start time is permanent or temporary, and we know it's temporary, but management calls everything permanent, don't they? Because this is how they will try to find a way out of paying the out of schedule premium. That's all they're trying to avoid, see? They could care less. Again, putting business before the contract. They could care less about whether they're in compliance as long as they don't have to pay more money. So how can we remove that veil from management's argument or move the needle towards temporary rather than permanent? How can we show that more likely than not, this schedule change is temporary? And that is the burden that we have to meet in the grievance procedure. The preponderance of the evidence threshold. So let's start with the documentation request. What are you going to request for this grievance? You get a notice that the start time is being changed next week, or perhaps you just notice the start time is changed without any notice. Now, management can still get out of it if it's permanent, but we are going to prove that just like every other start time change they've ever done, it is temporary. Number 1, any business conditions justifying the start time change. Now, this is an all-encompassing request. It will basically cover anything we may have forgotten to request because management has to give us everything they relied upon. Number 2, any truck schedules upon which management based the start time change. This is self-explanatory because the mail arrives on trucks. And the start times must be based on business conditions because they must be based on when 80% of the mail is at or on the carrier's cases. All emails, number 3, all emails or memos instructing management to change the start time. Now, sometimes we get something good here. For example, an instruction from the district or the area to change all start times. Well, guess what? The start time change then was an instruction and not based on M39 section 122. Number 4, the weekly schedules for the past 6 weeks. This just gives us some background information as to where the office has been for the previous period of time. Number 5, the posting of the start time change. This will help us determine whether it was posted timely or not and whether or not there was any at all. Number 6, all scheduled change postings in the last 2 years. As I mentioned, some offices I know of have changed their start time 2 or 3 times in the last couple years. Then that will show that more likely than not, again, the preponderance of the evidence shows that this start time is also temporary and management has to pay the out of schedule premium. And as soon as they have to pay that, guess what? Miraculously, the start times are moved back to earlier. Number 7, the mail arrival truck schedules. Now, this might be the same as item number 2 I mentioned, but you might get something new here. Number 8, the mail arrival unit report. This will help make our case because this report will always show the mail arriving 2 or 3 hours before the old or current start time. Now, management will argue, well, that's just an agreement between us and the plant. But guess what? It's evidence that shows that management is not justified to change that start time later. The incoming, number 9, the incoming delivery unit report. Now, this might be the same as the previous item, but you never know. Some ambitious supervisor might make projections for his own unit, and we would see them here. And they might be different than the official start time posting. So again, we want more information so we can pick and choose that information which will support our case. Number 10, the MAP report, which is the mail arrival profile report. This will tell us what kind of mail is arriving, how many flats, how many letters, how many parcels. In case management gets specific as to what type of mail is causing the later start time. For example, in the past, they've argued that parcels are the reason. They can't get their clerks, their function 4 problem, they can't get their clerks to process the mail, distribute it to the carrier cases on time, so they have to move the start times later. This might be because they're short-staffed or some other reason. M39 doesn't talk about the parcels. It only talks about caseable mail. So again, this will show us or give us evidence that there is caseable mail arriving in a timely manner and will help us make our case. Number 12 would be the flash reports. The flash reports for the date of the posting, if there was one, when they made the decision, through the date of the request. I like to put or through present. Now, not a lot of managers use these reports anymore, but they are DOIS-based projections, and we can use them. If they are in our favor, then they make our case that, look, it's not the parcels like you say. The mail is there, and there's not that many parcels. So you're not justified to make the start time change. And if it doesn't support our case, it's just a DOIS-based projection anyway. Again, we want more information so that we can use that information that supports our position. Next would be all standby LDC operation swipes in the past 30 days. Now, this will make our case because sometimes management says that the carriers are waiting. The mail's not here on time. It's inefficient. There's no 354 standby clock rings. Why? I'm not sure. In the past, it was very popular. Now, I believe management locally has to get some sort of authorization to have carriers on standby 354. But again, no waiting, no standby means the mail is there and on time. Again, helping us make our case. Number 14, any authorization from the district or the area which you're in to change the begin tours. I'm in the Pacific area, so that's what I asked for. But whatever area you are in, you will ask for authorization from that specific area. Why? Because there's an arbitration which gave this weight. Probably because the projections were so wildly off from the reality of the mail arrival on a consistent basis that, again, it established a command decision and not a contractual decision to change the start times. Number 15, all stand-up talks given regarding the recent start time change. Now, this will aid you in the collection of statements, especially if you as the steward or carriers voiced opposition to the start time during the stand-up, if there was any, in fact. Again, management not communicating, not negotiating, and this would bring Article 5 into this grievance. There was no negotiation prior to this unilateral action on management's part. They didn't even give a stand-up talk. How could we know? How could the union have any input? Article 5 requires this. So it's another argument we can make. Number 16, clock rings for all regular carriers for the last 6 weeks. Why? Well, this will probably never change. Management has their favorites, and they will let those carriers come in earlier. Why? Because they're fast casers, perhaps they double, triple case, and they're trying to get the most efficiency out of these carriers, even in violation of their own purported start time change. So we can find some more gaps, some more cracks to drive wedges into management's position here. Sometimes there may be some language in your LMOU which addresses start times. For example, if there's a wide variation such as 2 hours or more, but that's usually not the case. But you do well to check your LMOU in case there is something in there regarding start time changes. Now we have all this great information. What do we want to do with it? We want to sift through it. We want to prioritize, and we want to ask questions to management because some of this information is not going to justify the start time change. So we want to interview management. We want to interview the manager or postmaster, whoever made the decision, and we want to put our request in writing. Again, use a PS Form 3996. Management has to initial it. You have a record that they received your request, and put in at least 2 requests. That way, if they fail to make themselves available, they will not be able to testify at arbitration. What are some questions we could ask? Number 1, why did you change the start time to a later time? An all-encompassing question once again, and giving them the opportunity to put themselves into a box. And they hate explaining their actions because of the inconsistencies in the information and in their previous stances or positions. Number 2, according to the MAP input page, 90% of the mail arrives by 4:30 a.m. Or it could be different, the time could be different, but you will see this report will always show the mail arriving at the unit at least 2 or 3 hours before the start time that allegedly is too early. So please explain the rationale behind the start time change. So this is a slightly different worded question than the first one, but pretty much the same question, and you might get a different answer. Again, further putting them in a box. Next question. I noticed there are no 354 standby rings for carriers. Is that correct? You would just be establishing what the document says, getting some testimony there in case the union needs to call this manager as a hostile witness or on cross-examination. The union has leverage, has the ability to do that because this was asked of the manager. This is what he said, and this is what he has to say now at arbitration. See. Now, this will be based on the 354 standby report you requested. And in the rare case that there are some 354 standby clock rings, we will be able to go to those carriers and interview them and find out why or who. Sometimes management puts them on 354 themselves and they don't even know they were on 354. So we've got some clock ring integrity issues there that we can add to this grievance. Usually, there's none, once again, which bolsters our position that the start time does not need to be changed later since nobody's waiting around for the mail. Next question could be, can you show me which report shows a decrease in mail overall? Because according to my observations, again, the statements, carriers are working longer hours now than before. So we want to delve deep, we want to ask, we want to overturn, leave no stone unturned, and find out how we are removing that veil, because we know that this start time change is not based on M39122, and two, it is not permanent, but is temporary, which means management will have to pay, and they will not continue paying in order to be in compliance. They will always move the start time back. Next question could be, if they provide the flash reports, we could say, do you have any flash reports that have been reconciled? Because these are just estimates. Because they are. They are just estimates based on DOIS. Again, if they help our case, we'll use them. And if they don't, we're under no obligation to use them. National arbitrator Carlton Snow interpreted the regulations of M39, section 122, in his decision, cigar number C23986, in relevant part as follows. He said, "It is indisputable that the employer has a right to determine the method, means, and personnel by which operations are to be conducted, and also to make reasonable decisions that maintain the efficiency of the operation. Managerial control of work schedules, however, is not totally unfettered or without limitations. The M39 handbook specifies that schedules must be fixed to coincide with the receipt and dispatch of mail." Then he further went on to say, "The instruction is not a suggestion, but is stated as an imperative. The handbook, which pursuant to Article 19 of the labor contract has been incorporated into the parties' collective bargaining agreement, eliminates a manager's unfettered control over start times. Start times remain within management's control, but must," and there's that word, must, no wiggle room, must be exercised after giving due deference to the M39 handbook. We want to include this arbitration. We don't want to include any other arbitrations because, again, they're split down the middle, and regional arbitrations do not carry the same weight as a national arbitration. We only want to include regional arbitrations if they are favorable to us, are for our installation. Arbitration decisions, Step B decisions, or pre-arbitration decisions, which are for our installation and are favorable, showing that previous start time changes were in violation of M39 or were deemed temporary. Now, once you do all of this, and there have not been substantial changes in the mail flow, in the arrival of mail, contrary to what management states, you will have a successful start time grievance. Until next time, brothers and sisters, don't let them get away with anything.